Okay, we got Paul writing to the church in Corinth, and what's the situation? Not in the Corinthians.
What chapter are we in? Because I just kept reading.
We're going to be in chapter 5.
Okay.
Okay, and 6. What is the context? What's going on in the city of Corinth? Okay, you got a church sitting in, and it's a small church, small Christian community sitting in the city of Corinth. And Corinth you could describe as a place where there's a lot of turmoil. What makes Corinth kind of an interesting city?
It's a seaport.
It's a seaport, so there's a lot of different ideas flowing through Corinth. Okay. What else might create issues for a Christian community within
Their worship
that kind of
beliefs.
city? Okay, Corinth is pagan city. It's Greek city. So, and what makes it complicated is you have, not only is it a Greek city, pagan city, it has ideas from all over the world passing through Corinth, because every sailor who passes through Corinth in trade is bringing their language and their culture and their diet and also their religion. So Corinth is a town that's exposed to an awful lot, as opposed to a city that isn't. Wouldn't be, like Antioch is sort of a little bit isolated. But Corinth picks up a lot of things. Not only was it a port city, but it was really an important port, because it's right at that isthmus, which becomes important for trading goods. So Corinth is a real big deal. And as Paul is writing to this church in Corinth, what appears to be a broad issue in the Corinthian church?
Immorality?
Well, immorality, yeah. I'm talking about what we've already talked about.
Okay.
Because he really hasn't dealt with too much immorality yet. Mm-hmm. What seems, as he was writing in the first chapter, second, third, fourth, what seems to be the issue that's a big deal in Corinth? What does Paul see happening in the church in Corinth?
Being divided.
Okay, the church in Corinth is being divided. And what is the basis for the divisions?
The rituals?
Well, as opposed at the beginning. They're following different people. Remember, he talks about, you're breaking into, some people say, I follow Paul, and other people say, I follow Apollos, and other people say, I follow Cephas.
And they should be following Christ.
And, some people say, I follow Christ, but he doesn't see those people as being, the good people. You need to be followed with them. What he sees is factions breaking out in the Corinthian church. And how does he deal, and again, he's dealing with this theologically, not as much practically as theological right now. What does he remind these Corinthians as they're dividing up? What are some of the things he reminds them as they're breaking into little tiny factions, and evidently the factions don't like each other very much?
If they're supposed to follow Christ.
Okay, that there's something broader, right, than who they're following. And he talks about how each of the people, certainly it seems like it's Paul and Apollos, become the big deal. That's the nature of the split. That they have different functions, but they're working for the same cause, right? If his job is to, if you use an agricultural metaphor, Paul's job was to plant, and Apollos was to water. And if you use an kind of an architectural or building model, Paul's job was to, and Apollos was to build the walls. So, each of them had a role, but they were all working for the same cause. And even as he talks to the Corinthians, and they're still dividing, why is it, and this is a big deal, and he's going to go back to this. We always want to have this in the back of our head, because he's going to kind of refer back to it. He assumes that people know this. Why were the Corinthians able to believe in the first place? Because they're breaking up over, and Paul says, the foundation is laid and it's Christ, and Apollos, the walls will become important, and builders are going to be judged on the quality, all that kind of jazz. But then he reminds the Corinthians what really enabled them to believe in the first place. Why do the Corinthians believe? Why is this a Christian community in Corinth? And for Paul, this is a big deal. And we see this in all of his letters. Why are these Corinthians Christian?
The kindness of Christ.
Say that again?
The kindness of Christ.
Okay,
The grace of God.
good. The kindness of Christ, grace of God, presence of the Spirit. We got a good Trinitarian thing going, right? That they believe because of God. Why do they believe? God. No, I believe because Apollos is such a good speaker. No, you believe because of God. I believe because Paul laid such a good foundation. No, you believe because of God. Therefore, there's no reason either to feel pride in yourself. I believe because I'm just such a smart person, so much smarter than other people. No, because what you believe, the smart people consider foolish. What you believe, understand, the people who are the smartest think you're nuts. They think it's all foolish. And the super religious people think it's all blasphemy. Don't try to impress them, because they're not going to be impressed by what you believe. Don't feel proud in yourself, and don't divide over this, what other people are doing, because it is ultimately God who is doing this. God is the one that enables you to believe, which is something really kind of important, I think, for us as we go about our lives, that it's not about who we are or how smart we are or what we've done and all this kind of jazz. Ultimately, we believe because of God. We believe because of God. And that's where we should focus, although since we're human beings, that becomes kind of challenging, because human beings don't do that kind of stuff. Okay, so he's established that. Now, everything else that he says in his letter, that's kind of involved in it. And that's why he establishes it first off, before getting into specific issues, that it's God that's doing this. So everything else is sort of predicated on the people accepting that. And as we move into the 5th chapter, we've got a shift in gears, right? Because how does chapter 5 begin? It shows that Paul is really making a little shift.
It starts with the immorality in the church.
Yeah, and how does he get this what does he say about what he's about to discuss? In other words, why is he about to discuss this? Why is he about to enter this topic? Verse 1, chapter 5. What does it say?
It is actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you, in a kind that is not found even among pagans. For a man is living with his father's wife.
Okay, what are the first words to that?
Reported.
It was reported. In other words, why is he talking about that? Because he heard about it. This is something that's been reported to him. Okay, that's occurring. And what's been reported is this business of sexual immorality. Now remember, I told you Paul is a plotter. So most of this, even though it looks like he's talking about all kinds of different topics, they're all kind of tied together in the next 2 chapters. They're all connected with this, and we'll sort of talk about that as we go through it. There's sexual immorality. Now, understand for the Greeks, this, and the words he chooses to use, because it's porneia, it covers a lot of territory. There's a lot of territory covered by this. It's not one, but it's some kind of, and where is this sexual immorality taking place?
Within the church.
It's taking place within the church. So it's not taking place on the outside. He's not talking about something that they're exposed to, but it's something that's occurring within the church. And what's the severity of this problem? How severe is this problem in his opinion?
Very severe, but I need to figure this out though, because if the father died and he's living with his father's wife, then to me, that would be acceptable.
Well, what does he say? What does he say?
He says you should have mourned first.
Well, even before that, as he's kind of pointing to, it's been reported to me, this issue of sexual immorality. And how does he describe? Because how he describes the sexual immorality I think it's important as we look at everything else he says in the next 2 chapters, because it's all going to be tied together. In other words, what sign does he give that this issue within the Corinthians, this particular issue, and it's really limited.
It's found in God's commandments not to do this.
Well, what does it say?
It says it's a kind that's not even found.
What's that?
The heathen.
Yes! This is something that even pagans think is terrible. So he's not saying, it's terrible because of the word, or it's terrible because we all know immorality, he's saying this is something that even the people outside the church think is bad. The culture outside of this community considers bad, which may tell us a little bit about why he sees this as a particularly bad problem. And we'll talk about one of the issues that complicates it. But what might it tell us about why he's picking this one first? Something that even pagans think is bad. And Bev, I think what you raise is a good point. As we look at it in the 21st century, we say, that ain't so bad. But Paul says it's something that even the pagans think is bad. What does that tell us about the issue, or one of the reasons this issue is so bad for the church?
Because if the pagans are saying, and they're already very immoral, then it's, yeah.
Okay, if the pagans are saying it's bad, and the pagans did, it's kind of interesting when you look at Roman law and Greek culture. We often look at it as being pretty loose in terms of sexual immorality. But according to Roman law, this becomes an example of an incestuous relationship. And therefore, that's how the Romans, but it's defined by the Romans. That's how the Romans define the culture around the Corinthians church, viewed this as incestuous, even though it wasn't blood. Even though it wasn't his mother, according to Roman law, it was an incestuous relationship, and the punishment is very severe in Roman law. Okay? Now, may have other, tentacles that go into, property rights, and because the Romans were all into the law. But this was something illegal in the Roman system. The Romans considered this legally, something the Romans considered illegal. So it's not even something that the pagans are doing, that this guy has hooked up with his father's wife, which his stepmother, right?
Which I just assume because they have so many wives that this old man married a young woman and...
Well, of course, they don't have more wives. They don't have multiple wives. They don't practice polygamy. The Greeks and the Romans didn't practice polygamy, so they didn't have more than one wife. That was also Roman law. But divorce was very easy, and women in Roman law could divorce. So it wasn't just the men. The men could, but women couldn't. In Roman law, both genders could divorce spouses. So they were really open to that, but they weren't open to stepchildren hooking up with their step-parents. That was illegal in Roman law. Now, why would this be a particular problem for the church? That something is going on in that church that the society outside the church considers wrong.
That will keep the church from growing.
Okay, good. The church is supposed to be functioning in this, and we'll see this later, he alludes to it. The church is functioning inside this community, right? In this society. In fact, part of the job of the church is to do what?
To spread the gospel.
To spread the gospel, to bear witness. And here the church, within this church, this thing is happening. And what's really interesting is, given that's the situation. Now, even before, based on what Paul has said, though, why is this really tricky? Why does this become... So Paul says there's a situation, one guy is living with his stepmother. Father's dead, living with his stepmother in a relationship. What becomes really tricky if Paul's going to come down on it, that the pagans think is terrible? What becomes the problem for Paul coming down hard on this? What has Paul said about Christians and their relationship to law? What has Paul said about Christians?
It's the law of the flesh, and he's talking about the spiritual law of God. Am
Well,
I correct with that?
Well, what has he said that makes this kind of tricky? As Christians, are we bound to the spiritual law according to Paul?
Yeah.
No.
What happened? Good gracious, I've been preaching on it. Through Jesus Christ, when he died on the cross, what happened to us? Why is the death of Christ so important?
The resurrection.
We have been
Free.
freed. We've been set free. We are now free. Paul never says, well, you're bound to that law and you got to obey it. He never says that.
But we're freed from fleshly law.
Well, he didn't, but he ain't going to
Go
go into, but this law you're bound to, but this law no, he says you are
Free.
free. You are free. That's a big part of his theology. You have been set free. And that's why it gets really complicated when he starts talking about food offered to idols and that kind of jazz. That's why what we saw in Acts is so odd for Paul. Because when you read Paul's letters, he didn't say, oh yeah, but there are certain laws you got to follow. He didn't say that. He says, I can eat anything I want. I'm a slave to nobody.
Right.
I am been set free. And he doesn't add a but to it, although he will kind of a little bit here. And that's what makes it tricky, especially if the church buys it. Because what we're going to find out that the problem isn't so much with the person who is doing this, the man who is doing this. What is, based on what he says, what is really the big problem?
That a little yeast leavens the whole.
Okay, right. What is the church doing that's the problem? What has the church done that for Paul is the major problem? So we got one guy doing this.
They divided.
Well, the dividing, what does it appear as though the congregation has done with this one guy who is doing this one thing?
Accepting.
That's it. The church has accepted it. The church has tolerated it. You look at verse 2. You should have mourned, but you didn't. You should have done something about this, but you didn't. It's the church that is tolerated. This act that even the pagans violates pagan laws. Now you can, again, looking at his theology, that's what makes it complicated. this becomes harder because you can't say, well, we're free from the law, but you got to obey this law. You know, what's that going to do to the Corinthian church? Now we're into this business about, well, which law is valid and which law isn't. Well, it's God's law. Well, tell me, what's God's law and what isn't? Is this God's law? Is this? Well, yeah. Well, what about that? Well, not so much. Where are you going to drive? Now you're in this complicated situation where human beings are the ones that are determining what is God's law and what isn't. They are making the decision, and Paul doesn't want to go there because it's not about us. It's about God. So that's why the fact that the Romans, the community think it's compromising the witness, and he's going to come back to this later. That you have tolerated. Now, what does he recognize about how this church? So the church should have dealt with this issue, right? And evidently they didn't, right? Okay. Now, if he had been there, what would he have said?
If present, I have already pronounced judgment in the name of the Lord Jesus on the man who has done such a thing.
Okay. So if he had been there, he would have said, and we already get an idea, what would he have said?
Stop it.
You got to get him out of here. You know, it's not even, you got to tell him to stop. It's, you got to what? Remove him. He's got to be out. Now, you can do this because remember, it's about God. You know, so he doesn't talk about you are damning him to eternal hell. You're talking about it's a painful thing, right? To tell somebody in the community that they're going to have to leave. But you know what? You may have to do that, particularly if it's compromising the work you're doing in the community. That's something you're going to have to do. Now, you know, he says, I would have said you had to remove him, right? And therefore, how should the Corinthians see that? You know, the fact that they know he would tell him to remove this guy. Whether I'm here or not, I still have some authority. What I taught has authority because remember, what did Paul do? He laid the foundation, right? Mm-hmm. So since I laid the foundation is still there. I still have authority. So whether I'm there or not, you know what's right to do. In fact, what should you do? And this is kind of dramatic.
You are to hand this man over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord.
Now, what is he talking about? What might he be talking about here? Now understand, this guy who is with his mother, and we can't look at this through 20th century eyes, 21st century eyes. This guy who is living with his stepmother in a married relationship.
Excommunicate him from the church until he repents.
I think even more dramatic than that. Turn his foot. He's breaking the law. He's breaking Roman law. He is breaking Roman law. You know what you may have to do?
Turn him over to the authorities.
Turn him over to the authorities. And you know what they might do?
Kill him.
They may execute him. But isn't that what he says here? Hand him over for the destruction of the flesh.
Wow.
You know, it's that dramatic. But then, even if the flesh is destroyed, what can't you control? What can't you, as the church, control? What God does on the day of judgment. That's out of your hands. That's not your job. But your job is to deal with an issue that is compromising your work here. Okay? Now, in verse 6, this is really dramatic. If you've got a problem in this church that is compromising your work because it's illegal, you got to deal with that. You got to deal with it. Now, in verse 6, what does he say? What does he say in verse 6?
That the church won't go if the immorality is there.
don't be boasting. Don't be boasting, right? Isn't that what he says in verse 6? What are they boasting about? Given what he has just said, what are they boasting about? What do you think they're boasting about?
That they're a good church, that they're accepted.
That's boasting. We are free from the law. Therefore, it doesn't matter if people are violating civic law. Doesn't matter at all. Here, we are free from the law. And even if it's compromising our witness, even if the people outside these walls think that we're disgusting, just shows that we're free, right? Actually, that makes us closer to God, doesn't it? Because we are even more godly. Because we are boasting in the freedom we have in God. Paul says what? Don't do it. Why shouldn't you do it? What analogy does he use? A little bit of leaven. A little bit of yeast can do what?
Destroy the whole lump.
The whole lump is gone. And this guy who's with his mother, his stepmother, man, that's a little leaven. That's a little yeast, and it can destroy the whole church. It can destroy the whole church. Now, this is a very, very specific example. But like I said, Paul is a plotter. So he's just not going to deal with this. He's going to broaden it out. He's going to make it broader. But again, remember, we're in this tension because Paul believes we are free. Christians have been set free. And so he's not going to say, well, here are the 20 things you need to do. This is the new law. He ain't going to say that in the Galatian letter. In fact, he says if anybody comes like that and starts giving you new laws, reject them. Even if I do it, reject me. So he ain't going to go there. So somehow he's going to have to walk a very thin line where you've got freedom, you've been set free, but maybe you shouldn't do everything you might want to do. Now that's a tricky line to walk. Be much easier if he just said, the law says no, so stop doing it. Okay, so talking about yeast, and what do you have to do with yeast? If you don't want the loaf leaven, you don't use it.
But I was thinking of Mary Magdalene and Jesus, he forgave her and he didn't judge her.
You're right.
This is hard.
You're exactly right. Who did not judge her?
Jesus.
Right. Is this church, are the people in this church Jesus? No.
Obviously.
And I think Alice, I think you're 100% right. It is what God is. That's what he says here. On the day of judgment, God's going to make the decision. He's going to go back to that in a little bit too.
She was repentant.
As all of society, that God's going to deal. You don't worry about it. God's going to deal with it. The point isn't, are we, and I know there are other things in the Gospels that would cause us to say, like when Jesus in John says, when you retain sin, it is retained. When you forgive sin, it's forgiven. He says that in the 20th chapter. But Paul didn't read the Gospel of John. So Paul is sort of working on his own. But Alice, you're entirely right. But I think Paul would say, but you're not Jesus. Jesus can do it. But that's not your job. That's not your job. And he'll give a reason a little bit later why that's not your job. Okay, so you got to get the old yeast out, right? So you got to get the yeast of malice out. You got to get the yeast of evil out. And what should you choose instead? Instead of the yeast of malice and evil, you should be sort of claiming the yeast of
Christ.
The yeast of Christ. Well, the yeast, what is it? What does he say? He says yeast of sincerity and truth in verse 8. Don't you got to get the bad stuff out so the good stuff is there. So in essence, what is he telling the church about this one situation? What should this church do in this situation? By this guy who is even violating the standards of a pagan society, what should they do?
Okay, can we back up just a
Yeah.
minute? So verse 8, mine just says, therefore let us celebrate the festival, not with old yeast and yeast
Right.
and malice. So can you read me your?
Well, the same thing. Therefore, let us celebrate the festival not with the old yeast, the yeast of malice and evil, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth.
Okay.
So, in other words, what should your church, what's the goal for this Christian community?
Be sincere.
Yeah, be sincere and truthful. Get the bad stuff, what? Out. Get the bad stuff out because it's damaging you. Now, again, this is one situation. But Paul isn't going to stop there. He's going to broaden it out now. And he's going to start, as he writes more, he's going to bring other things into it. Because when he gets to verse 9, to what does he return in verse 9? So he's talked about how the church should deal with this particular situation. What does he say in verse 9?
Don't associate with
Okay, now we said this guy is in a terrible situation. We got to get him out. If we have to turn him in, we turn him in because he's breaking the law. That's the way it is. The world around us thinks it's disgusting. Let's get back to the business about sexually immoral people. Okay? Now, what might a church assume? So now we talked about this situation, which is in a broader sense. Now I'm going to talk to you about sexually immoral people. Now, it would be easy for a church to assume, and I think churches do this all the time, the world is sexually immoral, right? We're surrounded by the wicked world, right? And therefore, the church should do what? Surrounded by the wicked world. What should we do?
Well, what I was reading in here is, he says, don't associate with these wicked people that are within the church, but he says, yet you're going to be in the world and you will be associating with these people.
Boom. You're in the world, right?
Yeah, we're in the world,
You
not
know,
of the world.
I'm not talking, man, you can't cut yourself off from the world.
No.
You can't isolate yourself from the world. Which is a real temptation, given what he just said. You got to get this bad yeast out. Easy for the church to say, well, to keep ourselves pure, sincere, and truthful, we need to separate ourselves from the world, right? We got to push the world around. We can't listen to Taylor Swift. When I was in high school, I went to a Christian high school. It was very, very conservative. We used to say, didn't say it then, said it later. Presbyterians weren't Christian. That was easy. Presbyterians. We were to the right of Attila the Hun. We were really, really conservative. Some Southern Baptists might be within the faith, but a lot of them weren't. And Presbyterians, Methodists, Lutherans, certainly Catholics, Episcopalians, man, they're going to hell. Everybody knew that. Some Southern Baptists might make it. We, of course, all would. And one of the things we used to say is talk about separation from the world. We need to separate ourselves from the world. The world's an evil, horrible place. Now, what's the problem if I say the world is a horrible and evil place? Therefore, I need to separate myself from it.
God made the world.
One, God made the world, and
He made them.
He made them, and
He wants everybody
He
to
made
be
us.
saved.
He wants us to be out there announcing good news.
That's right.
Man, if I'm in here, I'm not planting many seeds, right? Where am I scattering seeds? Here. Do I need to scatter a lot of seeds here? Well, maybe, but not really. Where do I need to be scattering seeds? There. That's where. They need the seeds. That's where the field is. It ain't in here. or not exclusively in here. I don't want to say it's not. That's unfair. But we're living in the world. That's what we've been called to do. And so when he's talking about sexual immorality, here he's talking about sexual immorality where? In the church. He's talking about it in the church, not in the world. Now, based on what he has already said, how can we do that? How can we say we're going to focus on here, what's the morality or what's happening inside here, and we're not going to focus so much out there?
You don't want to be judgmental, so
we don't want to be judgmental.
Right.
What else theologically? What else what has he said about the reason we believe? Why do we believe?
Because of God.
Because of
we have
God.
to spread,
Why are they going to
spread our
believe?
light throughout the world? That's the darkness. We have to spread our light.
Yeah.
To
Well,
that.
why are they going to believe? Because of us?
God.
Thank you very much. They're going to believe because of God. They're not going to believe because of me.
No.
They're not going to believe because of them. They're going to believe because of God anyway. And if that's what I believe happened here, then I have to believe it's going to happen there.
Yeah.
It's going to happen there. So I don't need to focus on what they're doing wrong right now. I need to focus on
Me.
what we're doing wrong. Now, again, we got this problem in his theology, right? That he's going to have to explain. Because if he said we are free, he can't come back and say, yeah, but these are the 4 things you can't do, because that violates law. Because then we're not free, right? We're sort of kind of free. And as soon as I say we've kind of been set free, that means we're not.
Right.
We're not free at all.
Doubting.
We're not free at all. That's what, he'll say in Romans. If grace, or Galatians, if grace isn't free, if there's one thing that you have to do to receive grace, then it's not free. Don't call it free. Call it works. That's what it is. You do works, you get a payment. That's what it is. That's what he says to the Galatians. That's why it's such a big deal. For them it was circumcision, but it can be anything. Okay, so we're going to go worry. So we still have this problem about free. Now, he's writing to people and he's concerned about what? What is really concerning to him?
Sexually immoral persons.
Okay, the problem is inside. Let's not judge, because it doesn't do it. Let's focus more energy inside, right? Okay. We're going to focus on this new community. Now, as he moves into chapter 6, so we're not going to focus, our focus isn't going to be for Paul, talking to the Galatians. Yeah.
You're moving too quick.
Okay. We'll pull back. Okay? Talk to me.
So, I'm writing to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of brother or sister.
Right.
So that bears the name of Christ, correct?
Right.
But how many people say they're believers and they don't act like believers?
Well, what?
Or they're doing
Okay, good.
I mean, even if we just take
got
the
it.
sexual immorality about it, like say somebody refuses to pay their taxes.
You got it. That's exactly what he said. The people who don't believe, who don't even claim to believe in Christ, with this issue, let's not worry about them right now. Let's not judge them. God's going to do it anyway. God's going to take care of it. Where should we focus our attention? On those people who say, I believe in Jesus, right? Why is it so important for the church to focus on those who say, I believe in Jesus, as opposed to the world around us?
That is important, but then you'd never let anybody into the church.
Well, no, not necessarily. People, I think what he's suggesting is, and again, this is having to do with this issue of sexual morality. Instead of being in here and saying, well, this world is horrible. They're just disgusting people out there. It's just awful. Let's take a break on that. Which means we're really more open to people coming in. But when they come in, now we can give them kind of guidance and direction. That's where our focus is. In this issue, it becomes really much easier for a community to focus, I think, on the issue outside, because it enables them to avoid focusing on the issue inside. If you focus all on the outside, you never have to look at what's going on inside. And that's what Paul says. You got to take serious what's happening on the inside, because what's happening on the inside is going to compromise the work you're doing on the outside, and the work you're doing on the outside is not judging them, but rather doing what?
Spreading the word.
Spreading the word. It's scattering seeds. Remember, you don't scatter seeds and say, well, I'm not doing it there because that's a highway. You scatter seeds. And God makes it grow. But your job is to scatter seeds, not to determine who should receive the seeds. It's just scattering. That's what farmers do. Or that's the way he describes farmers. So and why does it become so important that the church focus on these issues that are on the inside? Why might we, in a situation, have to get the yeast out?
Because it will grow and it will keep becoming.
It's going to compromise who we are and what we're doing, what we're called to do. And if we are no better than the rest of the world, we have no function. We have no purpose. So the focus is inside, and that's what he's challenging the Corinthians. I think that's where he's challenging them. And it still goes back to the same issue with the guy who's living with his stepmother. You know, he has to go because he's compromised. He's doing something so outrageous that it's compromising the work of the church. But understand, there are a lot of things that you could be doing that really compromise the work. And he, like I said, he's going to go back to how you can also believe in freedom and say that.
Why do you say stepmother? Because this says father's wife. I mean, is there somewhere it says stepmother, or is it?
Well, I mean, if it's his father's...
Oh,
Yeah. I think if it had been his biological mother, he probably would have used the word mother.
Oh.
So it would appear as though his father got married again, for whatever reason. But by Roman law, that was considered incest. That was incestuous, and so that would have been illegal. So our focus has got to be on the inside. And he offers an example, evidently, of something that's going on in the Corinthian church. Here, that's another example where their focus is way too much on the outside and not enough on the inside. At the beginning of chapter 6, what does he start talking about? It sounds like it's totally different, but it isn't. It's still in this business. Where should you be focusing your attention? Yeah, what is happening at the beginning of chapter 6? Evidently, what are the Corinthians doing? Which again showed that their perspective is off.
Dispute with a fellow Christian.
Okay, they're having disputes among themselves, and what are they doing?
They're taking it to the outside world.
They're taking it to and in particular, they're taking it to who? In essence, what are they doing? What are the Corinthian Christians doing?
They're taking it to the unrighteous people to judge them.
In other words, what are they doing? I mean, how would we put that in?
Suing them, taking them to court.
They're taking fellow Christians to court. People within the church, they're bringing suit against other Christians. Doesn't say they're bringing frivolous suits. They're bringing suits, going to civil court to settle disputes among Christians. Now, how is that linked to How is that linked to the guy in the church who's shacking up with his mother-in-law? How is this the same issue? Yeah,
They're going by standards of pagans, that they're thinking
yes. Yeah,
to them
they're using,
mattering what the pagans.
he's already said, those people are terrible. You know, he doesn't say the world, oh, but the world is much better than you think. No, he says the world is awful. You know, the people, pagans are terrible. They're doing all kinds of crazy things out there. They're immoral, they're committing adultery, they're idolaters, they're committing fornication. This is not, you don't live in a wonderful, idyllic world. It is a rough world, but your focus needs to be inside. And you know what you're doing? You're taking your lawsuits and having who judge them?
The world.
Adulterers,
Yeah.
idolaters,
Unrighteous.
fornicators. All the people that you want to condemn, they're the ones that are settling your cases. They're the ones. Does that make any sense? Not if you put it that way. So what does Paul say? Again, it's the same focus. Where are you going to put your focus? Where are you going to exert your energy? Is it going to be inside, or is it going to be fixing the problems inside, or is it to be outside?
You need to fix the problems at home.
You need to fix the problems at home. You know, if you've got within this community, so if there are disagreements in this community, where should you solve those disagreements? Within the community. Why should you solve them within the community? Why should you be taking these issues and solving them within instead of without?
All I can think of is within Christian values, within the Christian, with God. I mean, don't take it to a sinful world to figure your problems. Do it within the church.
As a matter of fact, the minute you've taken it outside the church, outside of this community. You claim this community is
Christian.
It's Christian, right? And you have dedicated yourself to get the bad leaven out, right? And so this community has standards here. Now we're not worried, we're not going to be all tied up with spending our time judging the world, but we know what the world is. We'll deal with that later. We got to fix our problems. The problems at home. Good night. You think of families, same sort of thing. You know, we got to fix the problems at home first. But if that's what you're going to do, like the guy living with his mother-in-law, you can't take your cases, disagreements, and take them to the world that you consider so horrible. If you do that, you are already what?
Just as bad as
You're just as bad. And he says, you're defeated. You have already been defeated. The minute you do that, because what do you acknowledge? What are you saying? Doesn't matter how strongly you condemn the world. By taking the cases to the world, what are you doing?
You're condemning yourself.
You're condemning yourself. You're saying they have the standards and we
Don't.
don't. We don't.
We're giving up the power of the
We'll give, that's exactly right. And we're doing something even more dangerous if we're going to bear any kind of witness there. We're acknowledging their control.
Right.
We're accepting their control. And they're almost there, if you think about it, their moral superiority. Because if I disagree with you, we have a case with one another and we just can't solve it. Mm-hmm. And I say, well, I'm going to sue you. And you say, bring it on. And I take it to court. What am I doing? I'm saying that judge, is the moral authority. He's going to make the decision between us, right? So not only am I giving him control, I'm recognizing his moral superiority over us.
Yeah.
Over us. You know, I'm saying Alice can't help us.
And we're supposed to be followers of God, so we're taking that away too. The Holy Spirit.
What kind of community And he's already talked about this. About Bill, when he talked about the church, the body. Not individuals, but the body being like the temple.
Yes.
What has he already said about it? This temple that he laid the foundation for, and Apollos built the walls and roof. What has he already said about it?
The body of Christ works together. One part can't work on its own. It's got to work together.
That's what he's going to say later, and you're 100% right. Remember, he said the Spirit dwells here. This is where this is the Spirit in here. What am I doing when I say we can't make those judgments? I got to go to a idolatrous judge to make the decision for me because we can't do it. What am I saying? What am I saying to myself? What am I saying to the world?
That you're not believing in God's standards.
I don't believe in God's standards. I don't even believe in us. I don't believe God is present here.
Right.
Because if God is present here, we should be able to take care of it. But we can't. So I'm going to appeal to people who have no connection to God and they know it. It's not like they think they are. They don't.
They're just, people like that are just saying they're Christians. They're not Christians. They don't truly believe in their Christianity.
I think what he's saying is this is a danger. This is what's happening in the Corinthian church, but it can happen to anybody.
Yeah.
And I mean, we do it. We do it all the time. It is far easier for me to condemn the guy down the street than for me to look for problems in here. Or look for problems where? In here. It's a whole lot easier for me to look at my sister and say, man, is she screwed up? Rather than to do what?
Look at myself.
Look at myself and say, maybe I need to turn the boat in the other direction. That's hard. And he says, that's hard. Remember, getting rid of this guy is going to be, he says it's going to be painful. He didn't say, oh, it's simple. Just kick him out. It's going to be painful. It's going to be painful. Because we all know.
Because looking at yourself truthfully is painful. So when you do this, you got 3 fingers pointing back, and I do that all the time. Since I gotten older, is remember those 3 fingers pointing back. Because we're human. All that, and then next thing I know, I think, okay, we're good. It's right back at you. I used to carry a stone in my pocket too. Don't throw a stone, you live in a glass house.
Yeah.
If years and years ago, when I was in Indianapolis, after one, and I'd been there about 3 years. No, about 5 years. After a sermon, the guy who called me, was on the committee that called me, came to me after a sermon, and he says, I got a problem with your sermons, the sermons you're preaching. I got a real problem. I said, what is your problem? He says, I don't like them. I think you're stepping on some toes. You're moving to the area you shouldn't be moving into. And I said, well, at that time I was preached the lectionary, and so real focused on interpreting scripture. I do a lot of research on these passages. I think I believe what I'm preaching is what the passage says. And he says, I don't know about that. And he was a huge guy. He was about 6'3", white hair, combed back, southern accent. Used to wear seersucker suits. He was a lawyer. He was rough.
Holy.
He was rough.
Intimidating.
Very intimidating. And I remember he looked down at me because he could. And he said, and this is when, I'm like in my 30s. He said, and he was maybe, I thought he was older than he was, but probably in his 50s. He said, son, you need to remember who pays your salary.
Oh, whoa. No, get in his face.
You need to remember who pays your salary.
Oh, no.
And you know what? I did.
There you go.
And you know what I did from that point on? I made sure somebody approved every sermon I preached. I would write it and preach it before the service. And the person to whom I preached it was to tell me if anything in that sermon would be offensive. Did that for about 4 years.
Wow.
Wow.
don't think I would have been
Was it ever him?
that tolerant. I don't think I would have been that
Who
tolerant.
was it? Was it him or somebody on the board?
No, it was, because I didn't, that I didn't want to get into, but I had
Yeah.
somebody that I trusted, somebody that I really trusted, would listen to him.
But not
Would
involved
listen to
in the
me.
church.
And it was somebody in the church, yeah, it was somebody in the church. And I am not proud of that at all. I was wrong.
He was intimidated.
But that's what I did.
I don't think that's wrong.
Oh no, I was wrong. Because just the act of, if God's word is pointing in this direction, if
Amen.
it might be offensive to somebody
That's their
who
problem.
pays my salary, then I'm not going to say it.
But who really pays your salary?
Doesn't matter.
Well, I know, but I have to pay bills. And if I've got a bill to pay, I can't say, well, Indianapolis Electric, you got to collect from God, because he'll pay. No, Southminster Presbyterian
But you
Church.
can say, if I get fired here, God will provide another.
I sure could have,
Yeah.
but I didn't, because I was scared, and it would be really hard. And there were some good people, not just personally, but there were some more people I was very close to, didn't want to leave.
It's the enemy
He
that's sending
said,
us
my
help.
point is, he says that's going to be hard. It's hard to do the right thing. That's hard. It's not going to make you popular. It's difficult. But sometimes, not every time, because they kind of go into it in the next section, but sometimes you got to do something that's hard. You got to do something that's really, really
definitely.
hard. And it's going to be hard, and it's not like, it's going to be hard for a while, but then great things happen. It may stay hard for a long time.
God works miracles in the hard times, though.
Well, yeah.
He always comes through.
Okay, but that's right here. That's what he's saying. Sometimes you got to do the hard thing, but focus on inside. And if you're going to do the hard thing, you got to do it on the inside.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it takes more courage than I had when I was looking up at Joe. As just to balance it a little bit, 2 years later, and it was a thing about the sign, which was weird. But it was a whole thing about it, and it was very complicated and too much to explain. But he was mad at me. He was on the session. He was mad at me about something related to the sign. And I will tell you, that was before I learned the lesson to separate church pastoral things from congregational things. And there are pastoral issues and congregational issues, and you let congregational issues go. But I wasn't as wise then as I think I may be now. But anyway, he was a lawyer, and at the meeting, the majority of the session voted to purchase this sign, but for reasons. He didn't want that. And he was the only one. Two people were with him on a I think 15-person session were with him. And at the congregational meeting, he brought up, and it's not a congregation, it was a session issue, but he brought up the sign. And he started interrogating me. As I was moderating the meeting, he started asking me leading questions. I knew what he was doing, to put me in an uncomfortable place. And after the meeting, I remember going up to him, and I was so mad. Golly Moses, I was mad. And I went to my office and then came out. And Joe and his wife were there, and I said, Joe, don't ever do that to me again. As long as I don't ever cross-examine me in front of the congregation. That was wrong and inappropriate, and I'm not going to put up with that kind of treatment.
You'd being a bully.
He was being a bully, but then he was a lawyer. That's what he did.
That's right.
And he was a trial lawyer. And I remember I said that to him, and I looked up at his eyes, and his eyes kind of teared up. And he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry that I hurt you. I would never have done it if I'd known how much pain it caused." No, he did not say that. That's not what he said.
I'm thinking.
No, he looked down at me and he let me have it. And this was in the church.
Oh,
People
boy.
were there. He let me have it. And he chewed me up one side and down the other as his wife was there. And I remember his wife took my hand And as he was just chewing me out. She was whispering, because he was there and she was beside, sort of between us. And she was saying to me, just don't let him go. Don't. Because she was afraid I was going to come back at him. And I don't know that I would have, but that's what she wanted. She didn't want me to come back. Just be strong. But he chewed me out. He chewed me out. I'll never forget that. So I did stand up, but it didn't turn out. God didn't intervene and soften his heart. And he realized the error of his way. He chewed the pudding out of me. And I don't do, but be that as it may. Anyway, that's where we need to focus. Again, we still have the problem, right? If we're free, how can we come down? If we're free, how can I come down on this guy who's living with his mother-in-law? How can I do that? How can I come down on anything? If Christ has set us free. What does he say in verse 12?
All things are lawful for me,
Yeah.
but not all things are.
That's for Paul. That's huge. All things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial. In other words, what is he saying?
This says, I will not be brought under the power of any.
Yeah, all things are lawful for me. Yeah, that's right. But I won't be dominated by anything. I won't be. So all things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial. All things are lawful, but I don't want to be dominated by anything. What is he saying? Because remember, we got this issue. How can we be set free from Christ? But then how can I tell the guy who's living with his mother-in-law, you can't be here anymore? How can I do that? Well, he says it right here. Not all things are helpful. Not all things are beneficial. I can do anything, but I don't want to be dominated by anything. So we are still free. And then what example does he offer? Which evidently is an issue in the Corinthian church, or he wouldn't have used it as an example.
Food.
Well, he also talks a little bit about food, but in particular, I guess you could say it's a different kind of food.
Yeah. Sexual immorality.
Yeah! He's talking about what? I mean, what does he say? He's talking about people going to prostitutes. That's the issue. In this, the little illustration, to show that not all things are beneficial. Not all things, you can end up getting into something that would dominate you. And he uses the example of prostitution, right? People that go to prostitutes. And he gives all the reasons why it is what? Not beneficial to go to a prostitute. That's not a beneficial thing. Are you free to do it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Should you do it? No. Why shouldn't you do it? It's not beneficial and can control you. So we still get this that we are free. He's not going to compromise our freedom, but he is going to challenge us to do what? To really think about it. To look at what we're doing. And to consider, is it beneficial? Is it something that's taking control of me? Now that's really hard, because it would be much easier if he said what? What would be easier?
It's against the law.
Yeah, don't do it. Yeah. Sort of like when you're with your kid. And after she's asked you for the 10th time, why? And you look at her in those sweet little eyes and you say, because I said so. Right? Because I said so. You don't need to know why. That would be easier, but Paul's not going to do that. Instead, we're going to have to think about what is really beneficial. What is beneficial? And not just to me personally, but what's beneficial to what? what's beneficial to the body? What's beneficial to the church? What's beneficial to the proclamation of the word? What's beneficial to scattering seeds? And what's going to control me?
God.
Yeah, but there are things, look, in my family, she was throw a dart at a Rudiger family gathering. You know what you're going to hit? You're probably going to hit an alcoholic. Because that's in my family, deep. And the problem with alcohol and drugs and other things, is it tends to do what?
Take control.
Take control of you. And so something that someone else can do, they can't do. I can't do. There's certain things we all have, in my family we have compulsion problems. And that's the alcoholism. They just get compulsive. But I used to look at my office. What do you see in my office? First thing you see when you go into my office?
Turtles.
A helmet.
Helmets! You know how many helmets I got? I got 950.
Oh my word, that is too many.
And I thought it was
There's
possible.
How would you describe me if I have 900? Compulsive. You know what I know? I can't go on eBay. I can't do it. Because you know what I'll do if I go on eBay? I'll buy something. I'll buy something. You know what I need? Nothing. But you know what I'll do? I'll buy something.
I have one at home, you want me to bring it?
Oh, but I mean that's sort of what we're talking about. He's talking about here. Am I free to buy those stupid helmets? Yeah, it's until the money runs out. It did at different points. Until the money runs out. Yeah, buy it. But is that beneficial? No. Does it control me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's certain things I have to do. And he uses the example of a prostitute. That's not an issue. But buying those stupid helmets.
How many helmets did you have whenever he said, you have to remember who pays your salary?
Oh, I had none then. I didn't start collecting until later.
The enemy brought it to you, he figured out where.
Oh, no question. So, anyway.
I'm not
I just have one little question. And so we talk about, God in our lives and His presence and
Yeah.
good times, bad times, hard times, facing Goliath. I've faced a few. But through them all, do you feel that God teaches us something? He either brings that other person to see a light, or He teaches us something ourselves. I've never found it void.
Sure.
I've always found God does a full circle.
Right.
Definitely me included, and surrounding people.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't always know where God touches, but He always does a full work. Ground is level at the cross. Everybody, we're the same, and He works for all of us. That's what I found.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you faced your Goliath, and
Right, and what I find interesting here is as he writes here, he's talking about community. And he's not just talking about individual.
right.
He's talking about how do we exist as a community, because remember, this is the problem in the Corinthian church. The community is breaking apart. And if the community is breaking apart due to Paul, Apollos, Cephas, Christ is causing the community can also break apart based on moral codes, moral laws, and lawsuits and all that kind of thing. And what he's saying is that as a community, it's a little more complicated than just saying, well, you're wrong and I'm right. It's a little more complicated because we have to start talking about, is it beneficial? Is it controlling? Is it controlling us? But when we do that, have that kind of conversation, the result is so much better. We're so much stronger as a community than breaking into the pro group and the con group, or breaking into the supporting group, the opposing group. That's when communities break up. But we have to talk among ourselves to determine what is beneficial and what is controlling. That's the result of conversation. I think it's really exciting, and there's so much in here that I think is good practical work, not only for us as individuals, but also us as a community, which is what Paul is writing to the community. So anyhow, any questions?
That's very good, you should use it for a sermon.
What did you? I didn't hear that.
That was very good, you should use it for a sermon.
Well, what I'm preaching on now,
Should.
10 Commandments.
Should.
Oh, all right.
You like that,
Now
Alex?
you got me excited.
Yeah.
Something different. I
Yeah.
don't think I've ever heard any sermons on it.
Well, it's going to be the 10 Commandments through the eyes of Christ.
Oh, that's good.
The 10 Commandments through the eyes of Christ. Well, I wanted, and I'll tell you, I wanted it, you know, we did this freedom in Christ, coming up to the 4th. Well, since we're kind of overlapping this semi-quincentennial, I wanted it to be something that's also pertinent, because that's a big deal in our country now. Posting 10 Commandments. You know, it needs to be posted. Well, you know, that's great, but if you don't know what they mean, posting them doesn't really do anything. You know, just having
God's
them
rules,
there.
laws.
Just having them there, you need to know what it means. And as Christians, we need to know what Jesus said. And Paul, and you know, that's also important. So we'll be looking at both what they mean in the context, but also what Jesus did with them. And, or how he alludes to it. So yeah, that's what we're going to be doing. And we're going to do it into September. By gum. Because we got 10 of them, and I think we're doing 11, because this week we're not going to talk about the first. We're going to talk about how Jesus viewed law in general, his perspective.
Jesus what?
How Jesus viewed the law,
Oh.
his perspective on law. What's the purpose of law? Of the law, because that's the 10 Commandments. So that's what we're going to be doing. So anyway, all right.
What's next week?
Next week, we're going to be looking at chapter 7. Now, one of the things you're going to see as we do it, all of it's going to have to do with how the community deals with issues as a unified body. All the issues he will talk about will be sort of communal issues. And because that's the issue in the Corinthian church. And so in chapter 7, and he's going to be hitting issues that are pertinent to them. And chapter 7 is going to be pertinent to the Corinthian church. So
And obviously pertinent to us because God put it in the Bible.
absolutely, absolutely, and that's what makes the scripture exciting. I think makes the scripture. And when you look at like the Corinthian church in particular, the Corinthian church, it was a church that maybe had, in one sense, maybe too strong a sense of freedom. And therefore, that's the direction Paul's taking here. When he's writing to the Galatian church, on the other hand, the Galatian church was really fired up about law. They were really focused on law. So what Paul was trying to do is sort of move them a little bit away, sort of move them towards, a sense of freedom. And for the Corinthian church, he was kind of moving them to responsibility. What could temper freedom? Well, you got to be responsible in how you use it. The Galatians, you have to be more free. You got to loosen up a little bit.
So the Catholic Church should be reading 1 Corinthians.
Any-
Because they did not, when the priest and that was brought out, they did not take care of that in the way
Right.
that this is speaking to take
Oh,
care
right.
of that. And that has
Absolutely.
caused so much harm
Absolutely.
to God's people.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I mean, it's easy to see that like outside the box, like,
Right.
and all churches do some things, because we're people, but.
Right. It's, yes, I think Paul would say, if he were here now, that would be an example. Just like this guy
Right.
in the Corinthian church, that would be an example. Pedophilia, you can't tolerate it. You can't tolerate it. It's not a matter of praying for them. It's not a matter of you can pray for them, but it's just, hopefully they'll change. No, you can't do that. You can't do that because you're destroying your witness. You cannot do that. You got to cut. Sometimes you got to cut the cancer. You got to remove the tumor. It's not easy, but sometimes you got to do
I think we
it.
need to learn the difference between holding someone accountable and judging them.
Yeah,
Accountability needs to happen.
Right.
To keep everybody safe and.
And I think that's why he says, in what he says, even the pagans consider it disgusting. This. We would look at that and say, well, it doesn't look so bad. If the dad's gone, what's the big deal? I wouldn't do it. It doesn't look good, but it's not a huge deal. Well, for them it was. This was a big deal. This may have been a bigger deal than visiting prostitutes, which might be a bigger deal for us. But for them it was. It was a big deal. So, and I think pedophilia is a big deal. I think it's a big deal. You just can't tolerate it. You can't tolerate it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, let's have a word of prayer and then you go. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together and remind us that we are your body. Your spirit is here. Whether we want it to be here or not, it is here. Help us to claim it. Help us to recognize it. Help us to deal with our issues among ourselves. Help us to talk about things that are beneficial or maybe controlling. Help us to work together rather than to break into factions. Help us to be a body where the parts function together. Remind us of who we are. In the name of Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
I hate to keep